My name is Brian Satterfield. I'm the director of the Matthew J. Ryan Center. If you don't know, the Matthew J. Ryan Center promotes inquiry into the principles and processes of free government and seeks to advance understanding of responsibilities of public servants and citizens of constitutional democratic societies. This is the first of our events in spring semester. We have several coming up that may be of interest to you. We have coming up on March 27th, Christopher Kelly, who is probably the leading scholar of Rousseau in the English language at this point. We'll be speaking on Rousseau's Revolutions. On April 10th, we have a North Korean defector, Yeonmi Park, who will be here speaking. That's what I will announce today. We also have several student groups that we sponsor, including our main student group, which is Debate America, which meets on Wednesday nights. If you are interested in talking about issues of philosophy and politics and contemporary culture, this might be something that you are interested in exploring. Okay, today, our speaker is Jan Blits, Professor Emeritus at the University of Delaware, where he was a founding member of the University Honors Faculty and taught in the University Honors Program for 40 years. Professor Blits received his BA from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and his MA and PhD from the New School for Social Research in New York City. He has served as the Secretary of the Navy Distinguished Fellow in the U.S. Naval Academy and has won the Jeane J. Kirkpatrick Academic Freedom Award and the University of Delaware's Excellent in Teaching Award. His many books include annotated editions of Shakespeare's Roman plays, as well as of Macbeth, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Hamlet, and 2 books of essays on ancient political history and culture. I will say that Professor Blits is probably the person from whom I have learned most about how to read Shakespeare. I mentioned this afternoon that his book on Julius Caesar is one of my very favorite books of his and also on Shakespeare. So please join me in welcoming Professor Blits.
I don't think the microphone is on. Some people are having trouble hearing.
Okay.
I hope you can hear me. Can you? If you, no, you can't.
Testing.
There it is.
Testing. Is that better? Okay. There. Sorry, you're double mic'd.
Yeah, anywhere.
Sealed.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Brian and Jordan and the Ryan Center for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here, and I was enjoying your lovely campus. And thank you for coming. My topic is Shakespeare's Rome. Rome, as you may know, had a very long history, some 1,200 years. The stretch of time is usually divided into 3 general periods: the early kingship, the Republican period, and Imperial Rome. Shakespeare focuses on the middle, the Republican period, which is the time between 509 and 31 BC. And he wrote 2 major works on the beginning and the end of that period. Not surprisingly, Shakespeare shows great changes over those 5 centuries. Among the changes, as we'll see, are what Romans regarded as freedom, citizenship, the public good, and more generally, the relation between the public and the private realms. Underlying those changes, as we'll see, Rome during this time ceased to be grounded in a fixed territory and shared ancestry. We'll start with Shakespeare's The Rape of Lucrece. This is a narrative poem, not a play. It depicts the events leading to the ouster of Rome's early kings and the establishment of the Republic. We'll start there and proceed in the historical order of the events presented in Shakespeare's 3 Roman plays. Lucrece is a patrician woman reputed to be both beautiful and chaste. While her husband is away on military service, the son of Rome's tyrannical king, Tarquin the Proud, confronts Lucrece, sword in hand, with a terrible choice. She can submit to him sexually with the promise that he'll keep her adultery secret, or he will kill her and tell the world that he caught her having sex with a slave whom he will also kill and put in bed with her. Thus, she can lose her chastity but keep her reputation for it, or remain chaste but lose her reputation for chastity. Lucrece submits to the attack, but then, gathering her husband, father, and other important dignitaries, kills herself in front of them after accusing young Tarquin of his crime. No one doubts her innocence, even though she herself distinguishes between her, these are her words, pure mind and foul act, to which she was forced to submit. She thinks that she must kill herself to redeem her honor. Only suicide, she thinks, can cleanse her name. Lucrece's suicide, which may very well seem puzzling, sets forth the early Roman sense of citizenship. Romans understand public reputation not only more strongly than we do, but differently. Where we tend to draw a distinction between a person's reputation and his true moral worth, a good person can have a bad reputation and vice versa. Romans tend to unite the two. For them, a person's public reputation signifies that person's worth. Romans are first and foremost citizens of Rome. They are born, live, and die not simply or chiefly as human beings, but as Romans. Their private interests are subordinate to the public good. Romans are thus ambitious to serve their city and to be recognized for their service. Because they hold that the only things in life worth seeking are what their fellow citizens find worthy of honor and praise, Romans tend to believe that a person's life and action should be governed by the estimation of others. What is honorable will be honored by other honorable citizens. A good citizen is therefore a citizen thought to be good. His moral worth is his worth in the eyes of his fellow citizens. Public reputation determines who or what a Roman is. St. Augustine famously criticizes Lucrece's decision. Since innocence pertains to the soul rather than to the body, he argues, Lucrece is innocent and has no reason to kill herself. Her mind is pure, as she herself says, only her body was violated, her soul is guiltless. Unlike for Augustine, however, for Lucrece, as for Romans in general, virtue is not simply internal. Chastity is not a virtue only of the mind or the soul, any more than courage is. Like all Roman virtues, chastity involves or requires action, and a person acts with the body and the soul together. The body's outward action manifests the soul's inner purity or strength. Lucrece's suicide reflects early Rome as a pre-Christian or pagan society. Where Augustine argues that a woman need be pure only in the witness of her own conscience and the sight of God, Lucrece cares above all about her honor among her fellow Romans. For her, it is not enough to be chaste. She must be known to be chaste. Believing that a person's soul has no life independent of her city, Lucrece cares how she will be seen in the eyes of other Romans. She therefore thinks that she must redeem her honor by proving her virtue in action. Only a public, observable death can be her redemption. Lucrece is not alone. Readers are often struck by how many Romans of both sexes kill themselves in Shakespeare's Roman plays. In Julius Caesar, at least 5, including Brutus, Cassius, and Brutus's wife, Portia. In Antony and Cleopatra, the number is similar. Even Cleopatra, an Egyptian queen, speaks of killing herself in the high Roman fashion, her phrase. For a corresponding reason, Shakespeare presents the Christian Macbeth disparaging honor, redeeming suicide as Roman folly. For a Christian, even the murderous Macbeth, the highest good is eternal salvation, not worldly honor. Shakespeare's poem concludes with the nobles who, stirred by Lucrece's suicide, expel the king and force the common people to swear never to tolerate another king in Rome. While the nobles think that political freedom is indispensable, the commoners, in contrast, must be forced by their fear of the gods to agree that Rome should stay free. This class difference is decisive for what follows throughout Shakespeare's Rome. Shakespeare's play Coriolanus, which takes place a dozen years after the kings are thrown out, focuses largely on the consequences of the ouster of Rome's kings. Beginning with Romulus, Rome's first king, all the kings except the last, the tyrannical Tarquin, allied themselves with the people against the nobles. The kings, though elected by and from the nobles, defended and served the commoners who were their political strength. This alliance kept the nobles in check. But with the kings now gone, the nobles became abusive, and the commoners had no one to protect them. One major grievance was the nobles price gouging the people on food. To protect themselves, the commoners abandoned Rome, leaving the nobles to face threatening enemies alone. This pressure tactic worked. The Roman Senate agreed to establish a new political office. The office consisted of officers called tribunes, chosen by the commoners from their own class. By dividing political power in Rome, the new office created a system of checks and balances between Rome's two major classes. This was the first time in Western history that an aristocracy was forced to share power with officers of the common people. In Shakespeare's play, Coriolanus is the principal opponent of the new office. Known early in the play by his birth name, Caius Marcius, Coriolanus is Rome's superhuman hero in war. I cut a wonderful story very, very short here. When a neighboring tribe, the Volscians, tried to take advantage of Rome's civil unrest, Marcius, all by himself, pursues the enemy into their city, Corioli, and defeats them single-handedly in a bloody fight. By defeating Corioli, Marcius gains his new name, Coriolanus. He wins the name of the city he defeats. Much like Rome itself, Coriolanus is characterized by proud, spirited opposition. Indifferent to everything that is not truly worthy of being honored, he thinks that virtue alone should matter. Only those who are virtuous should rule. Coriolanus therefore adamantly opposes the commoners' new office of tribunes. The unworthy should have no political power. They should obey and not share in ruling. Coriolanus sees the new office as a Democrat power grab. The people asked for food at a reasonable price, and they got a political office instead. Coriolanus argues that the Senate's concession will encourage the tribunes, backed by the people, to be ever more ambitious. And each new victory, rather than satisfying them, will produce only further demands and fresh disobedience. This will, in the end, Coriolanus says, destroy the Senate and Rome itself. Coriolanus is not entirely wrong. As we see in Shakespeare's play, the office is no sooner established than the tribunes usurp new power, assuming the right to prosecute politicians. And as we learn from Roman history, although the Senate will continue to rule, the tribunes will become extremely powerful officials in Republican Rome. Now, the Romans typically elect their victorious generals to their highest office, that of consul. The Senate nominates and the people choose. Everyone expects Coriolanus to be elected consul. Candidates, however, must campaign for office. Voters approach the candidate in groups of 2 or 3. The candidate asks each for his vote, and each citizen announces how he will vote. There's no secret ballot in Rome until much later. You might think about whether you would want this election procedure. The Roman commoners love it. They think it honors them. As one of them proudly remarks, quote, "Every one of us has a single honor in giving him our own voices with our own tongue," end quote. In the voters' view, the candidates asking for each voter's vote honors each individual voter. Perhaps it does, but it also dupes them. The people's strength lies in their numbers, but the election procedure divides them into small groups and forces them to declare their votes openly to the candidate. One-on-one, with no secret ballot, the people are easily intimidated and shamed by the candidates. As the play shows, the procedure that flatters the people by making them feel honored actually weakens them and works to their disadvantage. It buys popular favor with crude Democrat flattery. Despite its success in fooling the people, Coriolanus hates the procedure and is reluctant to go through with it. His objection is that the procedure is intended to humiliate the candidate while blandishing the voters. In the name of equality, it reverses high and low. As Coriolanus keenly recognizes, by providing a benefit, providing a benefit is the sign of a superior, while asking for one denotes an inferior. The proud Coriolanus therefore wants to give rather than to receive, for giving is a sign of independence and strength, while receiving is a sign of dependence and deficiency. In his view, the voters' ostensible giving is in fact a disguised form of their taking. A candidate can win only by lowering himself. Rome's curious election format proves Coriolanus' point. Candidates for consul must campaign in what the Romans call a gown of humility. They must wear a threadbare woolen garment with nothing on underneath, in the hope that their humiliating near nakedness will win popular favor. And with their bodies easily exposed, They must show the wounds and scars they received in battle and describe how they got them. And even while showing signs of their noble heroism, they must suggest that they acted not for the sake of the noble, but for the sake of the people's favor. They must reduce their heroism to mere selling points. If you read Coriolanus, you know that the election campaign ends with Coriolanus' expulsion from Rome. The commoners first agreed to vote for him, but then, cleverly maneuvered by the tribunes, they renounced their support. Coriolanus, exploding in fury, vents his vehement opposition to the people having any political power at all. The tribunes seize upon Coriolanus' words, accuse him of treason, and under the pretense of law, find him guilty, and after trying to throw him to his death from the top of the Tarpeian Rock, finally force him into exile. Ancient writers describe Rome as two cities in one, a city of the rich and a city of the poor, a city of the nobles and a city of the commoners. The heated exchange between Coriolanus and the tribunes following his failed election highlights this. Each party denies that the other is part of Rome. What is the city but the people, one tribune asks, and the people respond, true, the people are the city. To them, Rome consists only of commoners. To Coriolanus, on the other hand, only the nobles are Romans. Though in Rome littered, he says, the commoners are not, quote, not Romans, though calved in the porch of the Capitol, end quote. The common people are no more Roman than the cattle born in the city. Merit, not birth, makes one a Roman. The key question then is what brings the two rival cities or classes together as Rome? What makes Rome a functioning city? The answer rests on the presence of external dangers and wars. As Shakespeare shows, the battle between Rome's nobles and commoners decreases when Rome is at war or threatened by foreign enemies, and increases when Rome is at peace abroad. The tribunes, for example, try to destroy Coriolanus as soon as they hear that he has defeated Corioli. But then, as soon as they hear that he is marching on Rome with a Volscian army to gain revenge for having been exiled, they desperately try to team themselves up with the nobles, proclaiming themselves fellow countrymen. Peace abroad, in short, brings conflict at home, while conflict abroad brings at least teamwork at home. The interchange of war and peace is one of the secrets of Rome's enormous success. Threats of foreign enemies help to temper the domestic strife. Facing foreign dangers, the nobles recognize their need for soldiers, and the people recognize their need for leaders. Foreign wars were at the same time expanding Rome's power, thus moderate both parties by uniting their interests. Moreover, the wars help to keep Rome free. Coriolanus wishes to take away the commoners' liberty and have them submissively obey the nobles' commands. Yet even he recognizes that if the people are weak in the city, they will not be strong in battle. They need the same restless spirit in war that rouses them against the nobles at home and demands liberty for themselves. Yet the ceasefire between the competing classes must always remain tenuous and never become permanent. The class strife, though subdued, must endure. To understand why that's necessary, it's helpful to ask what we are to think of the tribunes. Shakespeare shows them to be cunning and cruel, always stirring up trouble while claiming to be Rome's peacemakers. Nevertheless, he also shows them to be crucial in keeping Rome free. As indicated earlier, the great danger to Rome is that the common people would welcome a king. Where the nobles, spurred by ambition and envy, do not want to be ruled by an equal, the people do not want to be ruled harshly. and a king can readily rule kindly. Having been treated agreeably by Rome's early kings, the people hated the last one, Tarquin the Proud, because he behaved not like a king, but like a cruel tyrant. The tribunes and nobles, although staunch political foes, thus share a common interest. The tribunes want to be the people's sole leader. They fear Coriolanus' election to consul because, as one of them says, if Coriolanus is elected, quote, then our office may during his power go to sleep, end quote. The tribunes keep urging the people to demand that Coriolanus treat them kindly. But that is just what they try very hard to avoid. They need the commoners to fear and hate Coriolanus as their chief enemy. The nobles must likewise keep the people and Rome's heroes apart. They must maintain class solidarity and avoid having any noble adopt the people's cause. Since the danger to the republic is monarchy supported by and in support of the people, the tribunes' ambition and power on the one hand, and the nobles' contempt for and distance from the people on the other, are needed to keep Rome free. This brings us to the play Julius Caesar. Caesar takes place 4.5 centuries after Coriolanus. That's a long time. During that time, Rome grew from a small city threatened by its neighbors to an imperial power stretching from the Atlantic to mid-Asia. Rome's vast empire eroded the nobles' cohesion and weakened the Romans' devotion to the common good. Conquest brought complacency, complacency brought corruption, and corruption allowed and even encouraged Romans to pursue their private interests and private goods. A century before the events in Shakespeare's Caesar, Rome defeated Carthage, its last menacing enemy. As a result, Rome's internal strife, no longer tempered by a frightening foe, turned first to murder and mob violence, then to full-scale civil war. On behalf of the commoners and the nobles alike, powerful Romans leading private armies went so far as to invade Rome itself. Military means were now used to settle political conflicts. Shakespeare's play thus begins with Caesar's celebration of his victory over the forces of Pompey the Great, his principal rival and former co-ruler, and ends with Antony and Octavius's defeat of Brutus and Cassius, the last of the Roman republicans. Civil war frames Shakespeare's drama. We see throughout Caesar that Romans have become interested chiefly in their private goods, pleasures, and pursuits. The commoners, whom Shakespeare identifies by their various trades rather than as citizens, as in Coriolanus, care mostly for money and entertainment, bread and circuses. Their ties to the military hero Caesar are direct and personal, largely independent of his political office, which is never mentioned. The people still regard kingship as tyrannical, but they consider the heart of liberty to consist not in having political rights, but in their being favored, feted, and flattered. A would-be king just needs to avoid using the word king, as the resourceful Caesar carefully does. The nobles, on the other hand, want to rescue or restore Rome's political freedom. Yet at least one noble, Casca, shows how disengaged or complacent some Romans have become. When Antony 3 times offers Caesar a crown and Caesar refuses it, Casca is content to laugh at the episode. He finds it comical because he thinks that Caesar really wanted the crown and refused it only because of the people's unexpected opposition. While mouthing Coriolanus' disgust for the people, he uses many of the same phrases. Casca, rather than showing fear for Rome, views its political decay with the detachment of an amused onlooker. He regards Rome's high drama as a farce and thinks it's sufficient merely to mock its obvious corruption. Brutus and Cassius, the Republic's leading defenders, take the danger to Rome seriously. Even so, both have adopted foreign philosophical doctrines, Stoicism and Epicureanism, which denigrate political freedom. Both Greek doctrines place the highest good not in the welfare of one's country, but in the tranquility or pleasure of one's own mind. Liberty, according to these teachings, involve turning away from external affairs. Both doctrines, while differing in other respects, replace the city's political freedom with a person's inner freedom from mental pain or stress. For good reason, earlier Romans purposely kept these foreign doctrines out of Rome. Brutus, in particular, tries to straddle politics and philosophy. Although many readers, perhaps you, admire Brutus for his high-mindedness, I think Shakespeare shows that his adherence to Stoic philosophy subverts his political judgment and directly produces the conspirators' blunders and final defeat. Brutus, like other Romans, seeks honor and fame for his virtue, but for his Stoic virtue, not for his traditional Roman virtue. The central problem stems from the fact that Stoicism honors disinterested intention above favorable outcomes. Emphasizing self-mastery, it places virtue in what we ourselves can control. We can't control external events, but we can control how we inwardly are disposed to them. And it's not the evils themselves, but how we think about them that disturb us. Since the mind or the will is the only thing that truly belongs to us, intention or motive, what Brutus calls the first motion, constitutes the core of Stoic virtue. Standing above its outcome, virtue consists in aiming straight, not in hitting the target, intending to act in accordance with right reason, not in achieving a beneficial outcome. Selfless, rational, impassive intention is everything, regardless of results. Brutus therefore rejects prudence on principle and courts political defeat. A beneficial outcome would muddle the public perception of his motive. Success would leave uncertain whether he acted from a self-interested rather than a disinterested Stoic motive. Brutus thus insists that the killers carry out Caesar's assassination in a way that makes their, quote, purpose appear, quote, necessary and not envious. To achieve this, they must spare Antony's life, let him speak at Caesar's funeral, and seem only reluctant to kill him. And not only seem reluctant to kill him, but show that his killing entailed their own personal loss. As Brutus stresses in his funeral oration, in killing Caesar, Brutus sacrificed his, quote, best friend for the good of Rome. Not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. His willing sacrifice of what he holds most dear proclaims his disinterested intention. Brutus's final thoughts are very striking. When facing defeat and about to kill himself, he reflects on his life, saying that he has labored his whole life to attain this honor, this hour. He is silent about the good of Rome and expresses no lament for the Republic's passing. Instead, his last thoughts center on himself, and he judges his life by a standard unconnected to and sharply in conflict with the fate of Rome. Quote, I shall have more glory by this losing day, end quote, than Antony and Octavius shall attain, quote, by this vile conquest. Brutus's hour of glory is also his country's losing day. His personal triumph stands apart from and above the downfall of his country. In no way darkened or diminished by the Republic's overthrow, his moral glory, he proudly claims, shines through and even eclipses the vile conquest, his words, of Rome itself. As you may know, without reading Shakespeare's play, Caesar establishes his own one-man rule. Practicing a political strategy known today as Caesarism, he breaks rank, turns against his own class, and champions the people cause with lavish favors, artful flattery, and shameless demagoguery. He does exactly what Coriolanus refused to do. Having usurped the power of tribunes, whom he silences in the course of the play, Caesar rules in the name of the people, uses them to subvert the Senate, and destroys Rome's free political order. Shakespeare begins both Coriolanus and Caesar with the commoners. In both the early and the late Republic, the people hold the key to political power. Brutus and Antony therefore address their funeral orations to them. Where Brutus speaks of defending liberty, Antony uses his oration as a demagogic rallying cry, successfully inciting the crowd to drive the Republican leaders out of Rome. Once the people have ousted the senatorial party, the Caesarian party does not need them anymore and dispenses with them. They disappear from Rome and are never mentioned again in either this play or in Antony and Cleopatra. With grim irony, the people's victory over their longtime opponents, the nobles, proves to be their own final defeat. The ascendancy of the private realm, implicit throughout Caesar, is emphatic in Antony and Cleopatra. Where romantic love is almost entirely absent from his earlier Rome, Shakespeare centers this post-Republican play on the tragic love story of Antony and Cleopatra. Antony is still governed by the Roman ambition for unrivaled distinction, but his object has drastically changed. Even while seeking to be sole ruler of the world, he declares that kingdoms are clay and that the nobleness of life lies not in public deeds, but in the romantic embraces of a matchless couple like himself and Cleopatra. The full primacy of the private sphere goes together with Rome's universal empire. As previously noted, where life in early Rome was rooted in the soil of its territory, Rome's conquests have extended Rome's boundary to the edge of the known world. As Rome has ceased to be a city or a community, characters in the play almost never refer to it as a regime or a way of life, but merely as a geographical location. The name has lost its political and moral connotations. Universalism has freed up the private realm. Most profoundly, it has given rise to what Antony calls a new heaven, new earth. Universal empire brings the pagan world to an end. The gods which for centuries were thought to protect Rome as a separate political community and which inspired its martial way of life lose their significance and strength. When Antony's soldiers hear a strange sound underground, one of them solemnly announces, quote, "'Tis the god Hercules, whom Antony loved, now leaves him," end quote. A world in which one man becomes the universal landlord, sole sir of the world, has no need for gods who support political freedom, warlike action, or earthly glory. A world of universal peace needs a universal God of peace, a God supporting the habits of humility, meekness, and patience, not of pride, strength, and action. Where Rome's empire does away with the need for gods who work through the city and provide for people by providing for their city, Christianity, speaking to everyone everywhere, teaches that God has a relation to each person individually, related to private individuals rather than to political communities, and resting on personal belief or faith rather than on geography or ancestry. The new religion, like so much else in late Rome, is at once universal and personal or particular. The new heaven reflects the new earth. Let me finish with a crucial consequence of this. As we saw, citizens of early Rome thought of themselves first and last as Romans. Identifying themselves with their city, they were born, lived in, and died, not chiefly as human beings, but as Romans. In dying for his country, a Roman could think he gained a degree of immortality in the enduring life of his city. Worldwide empire puts an end to this hope. Men, therefore, are forced to think differently of death. Characters in Coriolanus speak of, quote, dying among their neighbors, end quote. By contrast, no Roman in Antony and Cleopatra thinks of Rome when he thinks of his own death. The concern for immortality remains, but Romans are now compelled to seek their immortality as private persons rather than as Roman citizens. They must find it in themselves, in their own souls, rather than in their country. The purely personal supplants the patriotic. The salvation of one's soul replaces the salvation of one's country. The next world replaces this one. Shakespeare's Rome, which begins with the immortality of Romans wholly dependent on their city, ends with their immortality radically independent of their city. In this, as in so much else, Shakespeare's Rome, ancient Rome itself, finally becomes the contrary of what for centuries it had stood for. Thank you. Now for your questions and comments. Please fire away.
Feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. Professor Blitz will answer them. If you need a microphone to be heard, I can come around with a microphone.
All right. I've been reading your books for 30 years. I have a question. You're very hard on Stoicism, right, consistently, because you see it as divorcing intention from actually achieving something, right? It places
I'm sorry, I didn't hear at the beginning. I'm
You're
hard on.
Stoicism.
Oh, Stoicism, yeah.
Because it prioritizes the intention rather than the result. Right? But one of the things that could be said for it is that in the hands of certain people, like say Cato, it gives some philosophical grounding to republicanism that it doesn't otherwise have. And so, I mean, it's very interesting that on your description and your sketch of how Rome, progresses, the republic is most vital and most flourishing when nobody understands themselves to be Republican in the fight. The nobles they're acting in their own interest, or their conception of noble behavior, and the people are acting. So in a weird way, they may be Romans, but none of them are Republicans. Right?
Yeah.
They are, they don't, there's no common good. There's no understanding of a common good in what they're doing. What's wrong with Cato's fusion here of trying to graft Stoicism onto the Republic and saying something, Plutarch says when he's talking about Cato that what he had done was put political philosophy in arms. Right? And that he was trying to make the actual Roman Republic into an ideal republic in some ways, to try to make that actual. Why is that wrong? I mean, doesn't Rome need some sort of self-understanding of what is a good and healthy republic in virtue of a good and healthy republic?
Yeah, well, I think it's an excellent point, and I think you partly answered your own question. Rome has become corrupted, and Brutus's Stoicism fits in with corrupted Rome, that what's important is my virtue. I'm pure, I'm strong, and the Stoic word is indifference to the rest of the world, to anything external, and that, I think, encourages and takes advantage of the corruption in Rome. With Cato, he still had one foot in old Rome. And however much he was a Stoic, and he certainly was an important Stoic, he was old-fashioned in that he did not distance himself from Rome. But with Brutus, I think you can see that Stoicism is something for public display. I didn't mention what I regard as the ugliest moment of Brutus's Stoicism, which is when he gets the news that his wife has died, has killed herself with hot coals. She swallows hot coals. It's a terrible death. He hears it twice. The second time, he pretends he doesn't know. And why? To impress the people, the men who came to tell him the bad news, that he's above it. It's interesting, if you look at copies of Shakespeare's play, not my edition, but others, you'll see that editors try to change the text to say, well, he didn't really hear it twice. He only heard it once. And Shakespeare wrote that part of the play twice, and he changed his mind and did it one way the first time. And different. They can't accept the fact that he could be so not only indifferent, but use even his own death to show off, her death to show off. I find that bad. By the way, if anybody is interested in the topic of Shakespeare's understanding, fuller understanding of Stoicism, I recommend Hamlet, the character Horatio. Editors frequently say that Shakespeare is at a loss. He doesn't know how to present Horatio, has him doing all kinds of contradictory things. He knows this, but he doesn't know that. He's back in Denmark, but he hasn't seen Hamlet in 2 months. You know, it doesn't add up. Well, I think if you know anything about Stoicism, you see that's not Shakespeare's failure, it's his brilliant success. He presents dramaturgically by showing the contradictions in Horatio, the contradictions in Stoicism. The character demonstrates many of the great contradictions and problems of Stoicism. And Rome is very important in that play. I'm more an antique Roman than a Dane, Horatio says. And it's the Rome of the Stoic period, not of earlier Rome. More. Let's have some questions.
Hello. I'm Tom Cleveland. I work at the Jack Miller Center. On one hand, I'm sort of tempted to read Shakespeare as a political scientist in this moment. He's got an analysis of regimes and regime change. And from one point of view, it seems like the Republic is pure, and then things become corrupt, on one hand. On the other hand, it does, as you were saying, once you get to Antony and Cleopatra, I would say like the poetry is more beautiful, and love is possible, which I'm in favor of. And there's a wider access to experience. You could say like there's a deeper, like more depth. It's more internal, but what's internal is deeper. And so from that point of view, it seems like he has some sort of other standard of judgment than political purity that's guiding him in his analysis. And I mean, my question is like how does he judge? Could you still judge him as like a political scientist looking at these things, or does he have some broader point of view?
Yeah, that's important. My answer is Shakespeare's plays, the key element of any Shakespeare play, this may be a slight exaggeration, but it's not more than a slight exaggeration. The key element is the dramatic setting. And you get a picture of the world by looking at different regimes, different places at different times. Here it's Rome, but at very different times, and there are very great differences among the people. Someone once asked me, perhaps most of you have read Macbeth, did Shakespeare believe in the witches? The answer is, that's the wrong question. The right question is, why do the characters in the play believe in witches? And what is it about Celtic Scotland, witches were thought to be quite common there. Why did they believe in it? And how does that fit in with other things? And I think it's the same thing with Rome. Early Rome, though, is not pure. The tribunes are a perfect example of that. The Machiavellian way of putting this is that good depends on some amount of evil. And without that evil, you wouldn't have the good. I think I described that. The class difference, the class animosity, the hatred, the fear, that gives Rome its life. And you take that away, and what do you have? Caesar. And the natural alliance is between the monarch or the would-be monarch and the people. The people want a leader, and if the hero or the leader takes up their cause, that's the end of liberty. That's the grim, short version of the plays. Yeah, the early Rome, it's not corrupt, but it's not, there's plenty of virtue, but it's not morally pure. And it depends on, I don't want to say corruption, but certain bad elements of human nature. Class hatred. The commoners hate the nobles. The nobles have contempt for the commoners. And what's the consequence? Rome's success.
There are questions from students at the moment.
Sure, I'm not scared enough. Yep, I understand. Okay. Hey, Colin Hilton, classics. All right, just following up on Stoicism a bit, I find this interesting. Leaving aside to what extent Shakespeare is really depicting Brutus as a Stoic, just dealing with the philosophy itself, is there not a more fundamental sort of tension between it and republicanism that comes from the physics and the metaphysics more than anything? So the real difference between Epicureanism and Stoicism is Epicureanism is a world of chaotically moving atoms. If there are gods, they are so far removed from the world that it doesn't really make sense to talk about them except as tranquil and blessed. In Stoicism, the elements are separated, completely ordered. God's providence is always moving the world like a good captain with its hand on the rudder. Seneca in some of the letters tells, some of the treatises like De Providentia, that to be virtuous is to imitate God, meaning that careful steersman. Stoicism runs into more explicit problems in the empire when figures like Seneca, for instance, commit ostentatious suicide when there's a bad emperor and it's impossible for him to act in accordance with providence. Is the tension more so just that Stoicism isn't really a philosophy that's aimed at dealing with something like republicanism as much as it is something like one-man rule?
Yeah, I think you raise a very important point. If you don't know, Stoicism teaches that everything in the world is ordered. Your being here today, my saying what I said, everything is somehow prefigured from the earliest time, and everything is necessary that happens. I mean, there's a real question of what self-mastery can mean in such a world, but that's another of the paradoxes. Stoicism is filled with obvious paradoxes. Yeah, everything is determined. Everything is determined. Everything is material, by the way. It's universal materialism, but material means living matter, and hence rational matter. If you see problems along the way, you're seeing the right things. And so everything is determined, and what then does a particular action, stoicism, crying, all of it is determined, and therefore you should accept it. And stoicism, in the most obvious sense, is resignation to what happens. Somebody dies. Well, that's life. You know, your mother, your father, your husband, your wife dies. Well, in a famous Stoic passage, so what if you break a cup? It's the same thing. You know, you might say that that's not your take on the world, but for a Stoic, it's all a matter of their word, indifference. It all depends on your attitude. You can get rid, you know, one of the strange things about Stoicism is how durable, at least in a vulgar way, it has been. Think of how much of the world around you offers ways to avoid stress. You hear it all the time. Overcome stress. You lead a better life if you free yourself from the stress you're suffering from. That's an echo of the Stoic premise, that the good life is the life free from internal conflict, from internal stress and pain. And that's the happy life. And the key to that is to accept as inevitable whatever happens. Everything is fated, and that means unavoidable. And the only important thing is your attitude towards, the quote from Hamlet, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. If you have the right attitude, it doesn't matter. And that's the example I gave of Brutus faking that he's indifferent to his wife's death. It shows he's a Stoic. No matter how close it hits him, he can rise above it. Yeah, I don't think Shakespeare loves Stoicism.
Thank you. Since you mentioned Macbeth a couple of times and reactions to the death of your wife, I'm wondering about Act 5. You already mentioned Macbeth says that he's not going to kill himself like the Roman Stoics, but when Lady Macbeth seemingly kills herself and he finds out about her death, he has that tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech. Which I was wondering, do you think that that comes into Stoicism there? Is it more nihilism? How do you make sense of his reaction there, given that he's just said he's not going to be a Roman Stoic?
Yeah, is it fair game to say something about Macbeth? Yeah, I think he's utterly defeated and it's nihilism. What might be of particular interest to the people in this room is that, this is my take on Macbeth. If he didn't have a conscience, he wouldn't have been the terrible killer. He's a fighter, and he sees everything, every threat to himself as a foreign enemy, an enemy he can defeat in battle. He externalizes what's internal. He kills, his conscience pains him, but he immediately thinks it's a foreign enemy. And therefore, I've got to kill Macduff, I've got to kill Banquo, Fleance. And the more he kills, the more his conscience bothers him, and therefore, the more he has to kill. This is the great paradox. Had he no conscience to begin with, he would have killed for the crown, and that would have been the end of the story. It's paradoxically his conscience that drives him to kill children, to kill everyone whom he imagines is in his way. He projects his conscience onto foreign enemies, and he handles them the way he handles battle, with a sword. Does that answer? It's a wonderful play, by the way. So I might add, since very few people read it, Coriolanus is really a splendid play. And it's usually not recommended because people mistakenly think it's anti-democrat. But it's not, I think, for the reasons that I explained. It's as much anti-noble as anti-democrat.
Thank you again, Mr. Blitz, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.